Amahle was a quiet, kind-hearted girl from the peaceful village of Mbale. She didn't have much, no fancy clothes, no gold, and no dowry to her name. But her heart was full of love and dreams. She spent her days helping her mother in the small garden, laughing with children by the river, and watching sunsets with silent hope in her eyes. She believed in love, in goodness, and in the simple beauty of life. One day, her world shifted. A man named Kwame came into her life, handsome, charming, and from a wealthy family in the city of Kumasi. He saw something in Amahle that others often missed: her gentle strength, her honesty, her smile that could calm storms. He said he loved her, and when he asked her to marry him, Amahle felt like her heart might burst. She said yes, without hesitation, thinking love was enough. But soon, whispers started. Kwame's family wasn't happy. They smiled in front of her but frowned behind closed doors. "What does she bring to the table?" they asked. "No dowry? No status?" They didn't see her worth, only what she didn't have. Still, Amahle held on to hope. She believed love would win, that hearts would soften. But sometimes love isn't loud enough to silence pride. And Amahle, so full of love and innocence, didn't know her heart was about to be broken by the very people she hoped to call family. The sun rose gently that morning, as if it knew a special day had arrived. Amahle stood in front of the mirror, dressed in a simple but beautiful gown, sewn by the village women who loved her. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the joy bubbling inside her. Today, she was going to marry the man she loved. Today, she thought, her dreams would come true. The small church was filled with music, flowers, and the warm smell of home-cooked food. People had come from far and wide, some curious, some happy, some judging. But Amahle only had eyes for Kwame. He stood at the front, dressed in gold and white, looking like a prince from a story. Her heart beat faster. This was it. Then everything shattered. Just as the ceremony was about to begin, Kwame's mother stood up. Her face was hard, her voice sharp. She pointed at Amahle and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This girl brings nothing, no dowry, no honor. My son will not marry her." The room froze. Gasps echoed. Someone dropped a cup, and then came the whispers, cruel, quick, and cutting. Amahle felt the floor disappear beneath her. She looked at Kwame, hoping, begging with her eyes, but he didn't say a word. He just stood there, silent, letting the moment slip away. Her heart cracked, but she refused to cry. Not there, not in front of them. With her head bowed, she turned and walked out. No one stopped her. No one followed. Her dress dragged in the dirt, her footsteps heavy. But inside, something had lit a fire. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was awake. The love they threw away, she would carry it differently now. Not for them, for herself. And as she left behind the wedding that never was, she whispered to herself, one day, they'll remember this moment, but not the way they think. Amahle didn't look back as she walked away from the village. Her wedding dress, now torn and stained, hung like a memory she didn't want to carry, but had to. She had no money, no family in the city, and nowhere to go. But what she did have was a burning feeling deep inside. She would not let her story end in shame. She walked for days, her feet sore, her stomach empty. She begged for water, ate only what kind strangers gave, and slept in corners of bus stations or under trees when the shelters were full. The streets of Accra were loud and busy, so different from the calm hills of Mbale. People passed her like she didn't exist. Still, she kept moving. One evening, after 3 nights on the cold pavement, Amahle collapsed near a small roadside stall. An older woman rushed to her side, gently helping her sit up. "You've been walking too long," the woman said softly. Her name was Mama Kemi, and that moment changed everything. Mama Kemi took her home, a small room behind her tailoring shop. It wasn't much, but it was safe and warm. Amahle cried that night, not because she was weak, but because someone finally saw her. Over the next few weeks, Mama Kemi gave her more than just food and shelter. She gave her lessons, not just in sewing, but in survival. She taught Amahle how to hold a needle, how to fold fabric with care, how to stitch patterns from memory. "Every thread," Mama Kemi would say, "is a step forward. Keep stitching, no matter how tired you are." Amahle listened. She learned, and slowly, she started to find herself again, not as the girl left behind at the altar, but as someone with hands full of purpose. Her first dress was crooked, the second, a little better. By the 5th, Mama Kemi smiled and said, "You have a gift." Amahle didn't believe it yet, but for the first time in a long time, she believed something might be possible. Her rise had no applause, no cameras, just silence, thread, and the quiet beginning of something powerful. Every morning, before the sun touched the streets of Accra, Amahle was already awake, sitting by the window, sewing by hand. Her fingers moved quickly now, confident, threading dreams into every stitch. What started as small lessons in Mama Kemi's shop had become her daily rhythm. She didn't have much, just a second-hand sewing machine, a few rolls of fabric, and big dreams stitched into her soul. She began by making simple dresses and skirts, soft and practical, the kind working women could wear with pride. She set up a small table in the busy local market. At first, people walked past without noticing, but slowly, women started to stop. They touched the fabric, admired the colors, tried things on. One woman said, "It feels like this dress understands me." Amahle smiled. That was exactly what she wanted. Each sale brought her more than money. It brought her hope. She used her earnings to buy better materials and set up a tiny corner inside Mama Kemi's shop. She gave her creations a name, Ama's Truth. When people asked her why, she simply said, "Because every piece I make comes from who I really am." Word spread quietly. Women from nearby neighborhoods started asking for custom designs. Young girls came by after school, wide-eyed, saying they wanted to learn. Amahle welcomed them all. She listened to their stories, their insecurities, their dreams, and somehow she wove all of that into her clothes. Her designs weren't loud or fancy, but they made women feel seen, strong, and beautiful. One day, a local magazine editor passed through the market and bought a skirt. 2 weeks later, Ama's Truth was featured in a small article titled, "The Brand That Speaks Without Shouting." Orders doubled overnight, but Amahle didn't change. She still worked from her small table, still shared bread and tea with Mama Kemi every evening. The only difference was, now when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the broken bride anymore. She saw a builder, a creator, a woman becoming someone powerful, thread by thread, dream by dream. 2 years had passed since that painful day. Amahle was no longer the same girl who had walked away from her wedding in silence. She was stronger now, with her own business, her own voice, and a heart that had learned how to grow, even after being broken. Ama's Truth was no longer just a name, it was a symbol, worn by women who, like her, had once been told they weren't enough. One morning, as she sipped her tea and checked fabric orders, Mama Kemi handed her an envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with gold. Amahle opened it slowly. Inside was a wedding invitation. The name on the card made her pause. Kwame Agyeman, marrying someone new. A woman described in detail, elegant, educated, and yes, from a well-respected family with a generous dowry. For a brief second, Amahle felt something twist inside her. Not pain, but something sharper, like clarity. She stared at the card, her eyes calm. Then she let out a soft laugh, not bitter, just full of knowing. What no one else knew was that just the day before, she had signed something too. Not a wedding paper, but business documents. Ama's Truth was expanding into 3 more cities. She had partnered with a major fashion distributor. Her designs were about to go national. She had built it all from scratch, without a dowry, without a name, without anyone holding the door open for her. She placed the wedding card down and looked around her small, sunlit workshop. Young girls were laughing in the back room, learning to cut fabric. Her hands were full of new designs. Her calendar was packed with meetings and fitting. She smiled to herself. Kwame was starting a new chapter, and so was she. But hers didn't need a celebration to be beautiful. It didn't need gold to be valuable. She folded the card, tucked it away in a drawer, and whispered under her breath, "He chose gold. I chose growth." And then she got back to work, because her future wasn't waiting at an altar. It was already here, rising around her. Amahle never imagined she'd see that house again. The grand mansion on the hill in Kumasi, where everything once went wrong. It was the same place where she had first met Kwame's family. The same home where his mother had smiled with cold eyes and whispered behind her back, "She brings nothing." Back then, Amahle had walked through those doors with trembling hands, holding on to love. She left with empty arms and a broken heart. But life has a way of turning pages. Now, years later, Amahle stood in front of that same mansion, not as a guest, not as a hopeful bride-to-be, but as a powerful woman, a successful entrepreneur, a name people respected. Amma's Truth had become more than a brand. It was a movement. She had opened workshops, trained girls, and built something solid, something hers. When she heard the mansion was for sale, she didn't rush to buy it out of anger. She took her time. She thought deeply. Then she signed the papers with calm hands and a steady heart, not for revenge, not to prove anything to them, but to take back a space that had once made her feel small and fill it with her truth. The day she got the keys, she walked through every room in silence. The halls were empty, the furniture covered in sheets, but she saw something different. She saw possibilities, a space for creativity, for fashion shows, for healing, a home not for pride, but for purpose. She had the deed framed and hung near the front door. It had just one name on it, Amahle Moyo. No husband, no family name, just hers. Later, someone asked her, "Do you feel like you've won?" She smiled and replied, "I didn't come to win, I came to heal." And in that quiet mansion, once filled with judgment and noise, there was finally peace. Because Amahle hadn't just bought a house, she had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her space in the world. The day was bright and warm when the invitations went out. A few wealthy investors, fashion insiders, and community leaders were invited to a private networking event at a beautiful villa in Kumasi. The invitations simply said, "Hosted by a rising star in African fashion." Location, the Moyo Villa. No one knew much more, but everyone wanted to be there, including Kwame, his new wife, and, surprisingly, his mother. They arrived in a sleek black car, dressed in designer clothes, ready to impress. As the gates slowly opened, they looked around, stunned by the beauty of the property. Clean white walls, elegant gardens, and tall palm trees swaying in the breeze. It all felt familiar, and yet somehow transformed. Then, standing at the entrance, they saw her, Amahle. She wore a long flowing gown from her latest collection, her natural hair styled in a crown of soft curls. She stood tall, confident, glowing. For a second, no one moved. Kwame blinked, unsure if it was real. His wife looked confused, but it was his mother whose face went pale. Amahle smiled gently and said, "Welcome to my home." His mother's mouth dropped open. "Your what?" "My home," Amahle repeated, her voice calm. "I bought it last year." Kwame tried to speak, but nothing came out. His wife looked at him, then back at Amahle, suddenly piecing everything together. The name, the location, the whispers about the woman behind Amma's Truth. Amahle didn't wait for a reaction. She turned and walked inside, her back straight, her presence loud without a single raised word. The guests followed, chatting excitedly, unaware of the storm that had just passed through the front gate. Throughout the event, Amahle moved with grace. She greeted her guests, shared her journey, and showcased designs from young girls she was mentoring. Her success wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Kwame's mother sat in a corner, quiet, watching. Years ago, she had said, "She brings nothing." But now everything around her, the house, the people, the respect, whispered the truth. Amahle brought everything that mattered, and she did it without revenge, just growth, grace, and power that no dowry could ever buy. The studio lights were warm, and the cameras quietly rolled as Amahle sat on the velvet chair, hands resting in her lap. Across from her, the famous talk show host smiled and asked, "So, tell us, how did Amma's Truth begin?" What followed was more than just an interview. It was a quiet storm, honest, raw, and deeply moving. Amahle spoke softly, but every word felt like thunder. She talked about her small village, about losing everything, about learning to sew with Mama Kemi in a tiny room behind a market stall. She talked about building her brand thread by thread, how she never planned revenge, only purpose. She never mentioned names, not once, but her message hit home in every corner of the country. "They said I brought nothing because I had no dowry," she said, eyes calm but full of fire. "But I carried something greater, my will, my dreams, my dignity. I brought my own worth." For a few seconds, the studio went completely silent. Even the host couldn't speak. The words were simple, but they carried weight, the kind that pressed on the hearts of every girl who had ever been told she wasn't enough, every woman who had ever been measured by what she could bring instead of who she truly was. Within hours of the interview airing, social media exploded. Clips were shared, quotes were posted, and the hashtag #MyOwnWorth trended across the country. Young girls in villages and cities posted photos wearing Amma's Truth designs, standing tall with pride. Mothers cried, fathers watched in silence. Even those who had once judged her felt something shift inside. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows replayed her words. Schools started discussions. What began as a quiet story of one woman became a national moment of reflection. Amahle didn't celebrate loudly. She just sat in her workshop that evening, watching her students sketch designs, listening to their laughter. She didn't need fame. She only wanted to remind the world of something it had forgotten. A woman's worth is not something given. It's something she already carries, and no one can take that away. It was a quiet afternoon when Kwame showed up at her office. He stood in the doorway, unsure, holding nothing but a look of regret. Amahle didn't flinch. She had expected this day would come, not out of hope, but because the world has a way of circling back to the people we once walked away from. He asked to talk, and she nodded. They sat across from each other, in the same room where she signed contracts, mentored girls, and ran her growing empire. He looked around, clearly impressed, but his voice was low when he finally said, "I'm sorry." Amahle didn't look angry, just still, calm. She listened as he spoke about how wrong he had been, how much he had admired her from afar, and how he never forgot what they once had. He said he wished things had gone differently, that he had stood up for her, chosen love over status, heart over dowry. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then Amahle smiled, soft but steady, and replied, "You were right, Kwame. I brought nothing." She let the silence settle, then added, "But I built everything." He looked down, the words hitting deeper than any shout could have. Amahle didn't say it with pride or anger, just truth. She forgave him, not because he asked, not because he deserved it, but because she needed peace. Still, forgiveness didn't mean going back. That chapter was over. Some wounds don't need to reopen to heal. After he left, Amahle turned her energy to something new, something close to her heart. She started a project for girls like her, those who had been rejected, abandoned, or forgotten because they couldn't bring a price. She called it No Price Tag, a shelter, a workshop, a safe place where dreams didn't need gold to begin. Each girl who walked through those doors was reminded that she didn't need to be chosen to be valuable. She already was. Amahle visited the shelter often. She sat with the girls, shared her story, and looked them in the eyes when she said, "They can say you bring nothing, but you can still build everything." And in those rooms, filled with sewing machines, soft laughter, and second chances, a new generation began, one without price tags, but full of power. The day the doors opened, the air in Kampala felt different, lighter, hopeful. Banners flew gently in the wind with 3 simple words printed in gold: Amma's Truth Academy. Inside, girls of all ages gathered with wide eyes and nervous smiles. Some had never even touched a sewing machine. Others had been told, just like Amahle once was, that they had nothing to offer. But Amahle stood at the front of the room, her presence calm and strong, her voice filled with warmth. "You don't need permission to create," she said. "You don't need a dowry, a title, or approval to be valuable. You only need your truth and your hands." The academy wasn't just about fashion, it was about power. It taught sewing, yes, but also storytelling, confidence, business, and bravery. Girls were taught how to dream loudly, to take up space, and to wear their names with pride. There were no price tags on their worth. No one asked what they brought. Instead, they were asked, "What do you want to build?" Amahle walked through the halls every week, smiling as she watched their ideas come to life in fabric, color, and design. She saw her younger self in their eyes and felt joy, not pain. She had turned her heartbreak into healing for others. This wasn't revenge. She didn't need that. This was legacy. Amahle had once been the girl left at the altar, judged for having nothing. Now, she was the woman giving everything and asking for nothing in return, just courage and truth. And as the academy lights glowed through the Kampala evening, her story whispered to the world, "You don't have to be accepted to rise. You just have to begin."